Welcome, everyone. We continue on with mind work. We also continue with the discussion on Buddha nature for as a topic. Buddha nature is a very difficult one in terms of trying to define it and to explain it because we get caught in samsaric words and phrases and conceptions. And it isn't in that way. It started out in terms of being kind of thrown off originally from the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, and then talking about that there is a sun and the clouds do not interfere with the radiance of the sun, and they're using this kind of a metaphor. The problem with this is that when we use a metaphor such as that, it's as if the clouds themselves are not part of the Buddha nature. But we will find out today there's two components to this Buddha nature, yet they are components that fit together. The difficulty I had in trying to go through this and discuss or hear discussions about this is that some of it gets it almost right, some of it gets it way off. And so it's difficult if you start looking up definitions of Buddha nature. You'll find all sorts of different ones in terms of that. I'll give you two extreme points in terms of this, of one very close, what I would consider to be close of a description, and one to be way off. And these are scholars, but you'll see what I'm saying in terms of a really biased viewpoint of the first one that says this: it seems to me that the Buddhists long ago found something lacking in the original Buddhist view of human nature. And to address that lack, they created a concept of Buddha nature along with a bunch of other Mahayana teachings. I'm not a scholar, so I can't speak to the historical evidence of what motivated early Mahayana Buddhists, but it seems pretty obvious to me that the teachings like Buddha nature are a response of what had come before. Mahayana sutras often say exactly that. Well, this is quite a real biased viewpoint. Probably somebody might have been from the Theravadan school and saying essentially all of this Buddha nature and stuff is made up, but it doesn't even properly address their own school in terms of saying things and saying an original view of human nature. And the early Buddhist teachings are consistent with Buddha nature. It is just something that was not emphasized in the early teachings, but in some of the early teachings, it was already there, from the Mahasangitas to the Parasangitas, Santakaritas. All of those were working on this already, in terms of that, and just trying to frame what, in terms of their interpretation of what the Buddha taught. And so it to read something like that kind of is a bit grating, or I could say degrading, in terms of how one looks at things, but it doesn't really help at all. Now we get to this Doshen Ponlop Rinpoche, and he described Buddha nature as this: our fundamental mind, no, excuse me, our fundamental nature of mind is a luminous expanse of awareness that is beyond conceptual fabrication and completely free of the movement of thoughts. It is the union of emptiness and clarity, of space and radiant awareness, that is endowed with supreme and immeasurable qualities. I think that that's probably the closest that one can come to a description, at least of the articles I was reading and stuff. I probably easily read 30 articles or commentaries on Buddha nature in preparing for this. And that's one that was, to me, the closest to saying this fundamental nature of mind. And again, where we get to, though, is that when they talk about our fundamental nature of mind, once we start talking in this way, we begin digressing from the true reality of mind, which is there is no R, there is no I, there is no self, in the sense that there is something that's a permanent sense of self. The self nature of mind is just simply how mind works, but there isn't any life in being, personality, or ego that's there. There's nothing. And as a result of that, when we begin to talk in this way, we see it throughout in the discussions. It's replete with talking about our Buddha nature, and that's something within us. But in fact, we are within Buddha nature. It's the opposite way. We don't see that in that way. The clouds are not separate from the luminosity of the mind. The luminosity of the mind illuminates the clouds and sees precisely why those clouds are there. It is by virtue of mind itself that the clouds appear. We don't understand that. We think that these obstructions are something has to get out of the way so we can see the luminosity of the mind. We just simply have to see through it to see that this is there. And we'll go through that in a moment, and perhaps try to get a little bit closer in terms of that. But once we begin to start talking about our intrinsic nature, we've already failed, because we put a stamp on it that says that we exist. Do we exist or not exist? That's not the point. It's neither exist nor non-exist. The self, even this illusory self, this Gilbert that's talking to you now, he exists in some form within the reality of mind, but not independent of it. And that's what's very, very important. We have to see things in this way to be able to understand how it works. But if we begin to try to identify with the Buddha nature as a component of our own consciousness, we fail. And what we do is then we identify with that and say, I want to polish up my own consciousness so that I can be in accord with mine. But mine, you're already in accord with mine, you just don't see it. There is a realization there of mind. It is not the realization of self. The realization of mind is that the self is impermanent. So when we begin to see things from a different viewpoint, it works a little easier. I picked out a couple of ways to approach this, and this one is that there are two types of Buddha nature. As neutral or virtuous states of mind, the transforming Buddha nature consists of impermanent phenomena. So, as neutral or virtuous states of mind, so states of mind, you could say, would be consciousness. You could say that it is phenomena. It is a state of mind, an appearance in mind, or apparent reality, as Nagarjuna would relate to it. As the emptiness of mind, this is the second one then, the naturally abiding Buddha nature is permanent. These two Buddha natures are one nature, although they are not exactly the same. One cannot exist without the other. And again, here we trip over words to say one, that this exists or doesn't exist. It isn't really in that way. And so perhaps he could have picked a little bit better, more precise words there than to say that one exists without the other one, because they neither exist nor not exist. That is what makes mind, is if everything returns to mind, there's not even the one returns to mind. So there's nothing that could be said to exist or not exist. This is a very, very subtle but important distinction that is missed by this description, because they have not realized mind. And not realizing mind, they will make these, what I would call a fundamental mistake. Even though it's closer and it's better on what they're saying, it's still clinging to this idea of existence or non-existence. But it's still not bad. What I'm doing is trying to retool the way that you process information, this phenomena, so that it is perceived by mind and not processed through the ego. Now, there's also what is called the three natures, and this is from the Yogacara school and Vasubandhu. And in Vasubandhu's treatise of the three natures, there is an emphasis on the collective liberation. Okay, excuse me. The three natures are swabhavas. The first one is imaginary. The second one is dependent. And the third is complete realized natures. So the first one, the nature is of phenomena. And so in this, there is everything is an imagining. It can be a confusion, but it's an imagining. It's not something that's real, but we perceive it to be real. And because we perceive it to be real, we perpetuate this dream. And as long as we cling to the idea that there's this dream world, we begin to create in the dream world, just the same as if you had a computer and you were building a world or a society in the dream, or excuse me, in the computer game. You would do the same thing. Is it real? Well, it's real, but do the people really exist or not exist? That's only within the computer. And so those things are imaginary. The other part that's important then is the second component of the nature, which is dependent. Now, the dependence is when we understand that the law of dependent origination, or the 12 nidanas, and we see that everything is connected, and therefore there is causes and conditions. Everything's appearing because of a previous cause, or associative causes that combine with a cause or a primary cause to create a present condition. And then we begin to understand that. Now, here, what we're looking at is we've gone from the idea of confusion and imaginings to a worldly wisdom, and which isn't bad. This is a profound wisdom, but it belongs to samsara. It looks around samsara and it says all of this is a dream. But knowing that everything is a dream, then describe mind. You can try to describe mind in conceptions, but it's inconceivable. That's the constant refrain of all the sutras, is that it's inconceivable. So even though we have the understanding that everything is dependent, there's still not a realization of the mind. there's a realization of the self that says, wow, this is all a dream. But we have yet to break through the bubble. So we can only present conjectures of what mind truly is, because we don't know. We, as a self, we could not know. The only way we can do that is by jettisoning the self and allowing the self to be absorbed by mind. If it was so easy to do, and I just say, just let mind absorb you, my work would be done in a week's time. But it isn't in that way. You have to practice. You have to come to this in terms of as a practice, to allow mind to have this realization. And then the realization is that this very mind that you're using is Buddha. We don't understand that, because then we begin to say, my mind is the Buddha. No, the mind is the Buddha. All sentient beings use the same mind. You cannot say that you have a mind separate. It would be like somebody using a cable company to access information, and they'd say, my mind is the cable company. No, it isn't in that way. You don't have a separate company there. You're just gain access to mind, or mind is now being demonstrated by virtue of the lack of self in you. It's still the same, but it is not an ego, personality, life, or being. It is just mind. This is the difficult part for us to do, because we want to be there when everything happens. Now we get to the third and of the swabhavas, and the third one is the complete realized natures, and they're all inherent aspects of the phenomena. The imaginary nature of things are what we think they are. Their dependent nature is that they appear to arise in countless conditions. So we become aware of this arising of countless conditions. The complete realized nature is that they aren't as we imagine them to be, things that can be grasped or pushed away. The three natures form the backbone of the Yogacara philosophy. But this realized one, again, here the mistake is made where they say they aren't as we imagine them to be. There's no we there. There's no self there. This is important to understand, that there's no self there. There's self-nature of mind. Mind still operates. It still operates and understands, and within samsara, it can function in this body. But the realization is that beyond this imaginary body, there's infinite mind. We don't understand that. We can't reach it because we want to reach it and grasp at it and to attain it. But we can't do that. And as long as we keep using these notions of that we realize, or we are doing this, or I am doing that, we can't get there. Because when you sit to meditate, you have to put down the idea of the self. Rest the mind in mind. It's the easiest thing that you can do. Rest the mind in mind. We can't do that. Right away, we start pouring in thoughts and habitual patterns that come up of fears and desires, and looking forward to something, regretting this, wishing this, thinking of this. We're inundated by all of these thoughts and sensations, and as a result, we lose the essence of the mind, which is just simply to sit. When we sit, there's no we there anymore. It's just mind sitting. We don't practice this way. I don't know why we don't. We have to be strong enough to be able to practice in a way where just mind is sitting. If thoughts arise, then the mind can see them, and they can see them very, very clearly in terms of that. We understand that because the mind, when it's not obstructed by habitual patterns, moves at a lightning speed. And as a result of that, it it is aware of very, very subtle arisings within the mind in terms of that. Last night I was reading someone that was having an article, and they were talking about how the mind slows down. And but it was a scholarly article, and they actually had asked me to become a panel to discuss that, but it was difficult for me because the approach was fundamentally wrong, and they were actually saying the opposite of what should be said. It wasn't that things slow down, is that they speed up, which enables us to see the phenomenal risings. And as a result of not having a linear way of thinking, but instantaneous, the true mind is capable of this kind of a perception. And so this is something that we have to be able to understand, that it is not in linear. Anytime you start thinking linearly means like sequentially. I think this, and then this, and this, and this, and this. And as long as there's this sequential flow of information, it has to line up and follow in this way. But imagine, because those are all these little dots that are this one, then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one. And it has to follow that linear pattern of thinking. But what if in that same snap of a finger, all of these are present? That's the way mind works. It's instantaneously there. So it is aware of all these things, all of the things that are arising, the potentiality of something that's going to arise, these ephemeral bubbles way down deep. Mind is already aware of them before they even begin to change from an idea to a thought. It's aware of it because it doesn't perceive them to be linearly. But if you try to count the bubbles in a soda, could you do that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But mind is capable of knowing immediately how many bubbles are there, what those bubbles' chances are to arise to become a thought, what those thoughts will do once they get and they occupy consciousness, which are wholesome thoughts, which are unwholesome thoughts. Mind is capable of doing that. We have to unleash the power of the mind. That's what the masters had said. Master Han Shan said, you have to derive the power from your own inherent power. And so when you do that, it is the power of mind, not the power of the practice. The power of the practice will just make you better samsaric practitioner. But we have to be able to transcend so that we use the perception of mind. That's why I call this mind work, because we're practicing mind. What is mind? It's the Buddha nature. It's the Buddha nature. It is seeing things as they are in the state of equanimity. Upekkha. This we see things just as they are. And when we do that, then the Buddha nature is self-evident and being demonstrated moment to moment by our body and our speech and our mind. Okay, so we continue on. I'll give you a little bit more background on it. It says the three natures form the backbone of the Yogacara philosophy, and by showing us how they see beyond our preconceived notions of ourselves and others, beyond things that we are convinced are true, they open up the path to continue to personal and communal healing. And there, again, I kind of, when we say personal healing and communal healing, we go back to the original patriarchs where they say, who binds you? When did you get sick? You're not sick. And the communal healing is just simply the demonstration of compassion. Again, when you look at this, you have to see this. And when you study things like this, don't just study one thing and read it and read other things, and you'll find there's varying viewpoints in terms of that. Just because it's in print doesn't mean that it is something that is the gospel. The same as even me speaking to you, don't take that as the gospel. This is just simply a manner in which I'm presenting this to you and offering to you the invitation to contemplate, to investigate yourself with that. Okay. Some schools teach Buddha nature is a seed of potentiality that must be developed. In other, Buddha nature is understood to be completely present but obscured by our delusions. Either Buddha nature can become actualized or experienced through practice. Again, when we look at this and we say, but are obscured by our delusions, think about that for a moment. What is there a flaw there? It is obscured by our delusions. It is a fundamental flaw in twofold, because we're creating a duality there. Our delusions, that which is imaginary and that which is real, but we're certifying an imaginary self as being real versus the delusions of that. We are the delusion. That's the difference. We are the delusion. We get in the way of mind. It's not just the imaginings. The imaginings are that there is a person. This is why the Tathagata Garbha Sutras were so deep, because when you go to the Queen Srimala Devi's Lion's Roar Sutra, and they talk about the nescient entrenchment of ignorance, and it has to do with the idea of a self. And this fundamental ignorance is there. We cannot break through that, because we are trying to break through. It's as if a cartoon character is trying to break out of the frame of the film. And I think they made a movie out of that, right? The one with the rabbit. But I forgot the name of it. But in any case, sometimes this may be like a Toontown. But the thing is that we have to understand all of that is imaginations. And that's what the Heart Sutra says to us, right? Departing far from confusions, imagining. And this is the way it is. And there is a total negation of things that No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thought. There is no realm of the eye all the way through to no realm of mental cognition. All of those 18 realms are imaginations. They're impermanent, but they are empty, meaning that it's not that they exist or they don't exist. We no longer delve in the world of duality that this is or this is not. Everything belongs to mind. Our problem is that we turn mind into consciousness rather than seeing consciousness belongs to mind. It's why I always talk about that, because it's very, very important. When we return consciousness to mind, this is the Buddha nature. The Buddha nature is with your body right now. If I say you, then you say, oh, I have Buddha nature. No, you don't have Buddha nature. It's empty. Remember? Does a dog have Buddha nature? And what was the response? Woo, empty. It's empty. Actually, I read that in another commentary, and they said they defined that as no, which I went, no, it's not no. It's empty. That neither negates existence nor non-existence. It's just the fundamental emptiness of all things, which is the Tathagata Garbha, which is the Buddha womb. That everything belongs to, whether it's past, present, future, all of it is contained. That is why in the Yogacara school, they use the Alaya Vijnana, the eighth consciousness, to establish that there is this kind of a storehouse consciousness to try to define and explain how things work in that way. Originally in the Yogacara school, they added that because it wasn't there, and their constructs didn't quite fit perfectly until they finally figured out there has to be something beyond the that, otherwise we will just fall into some kind of a nihilism with everything. And that's why in the Heart Sutra there's compassion there, otherwise we fall it towards nihilistic conceptual thought that nothing exists, there's no God, there's no nothing. Nothing means, no, there's nothing that means anything. But it isn't in that way. There's a compassion there, which is a component of Buddha nature. It's a very, very delicate line that has to be walked, that if we fall one way, we fall into nihilism. If we fall the other way, we fall into this kind of an idea that there is a monistic entity or collective entity that's there, but it isn't in that way. It defies those kinds of descriptions, even though philosophers are very, very quick to try to find something to turn it one way or the other. And up to this date, because of the sophistication of the Mahayana proponents, they have not succeeded in that, even though they think sometimes scholarly that they can find the smoking gun to show it's monistic or it's nihilistic or whatever. They can't. The problem with it is because it's beyond the conceptions, and it's difficult because they can't go one way or another. Is why Nagarjuna didn't say whether something exists or doesn't exist. The moment he tried to create a model, a conceptual model of what he thought Buddhism meant, then it would fail, because that model is conceptual. It cannot be that way. It's difficult for us because we're going, okay, well, what have we got here? Christians have monistic way of looking at things, and they have one God, and so they point everything to the God. Hindus have multiple gods, and so they do that. Buddhists, we don't see the Buddha as a god, or bodhisattvas as gods or goddesses or whatever people, the Westerns, depict bodhisattvas as. We see that as representations of the Buddha nature. And these are anthropomorphic type of representations of what we perceive to be, that it isn't a true representation of the of the Buddha or a bodhisattva, or what a bodhisattva looks like, or what a Buddha looks like. And that was clear from the very beginning, again, from the Diamond Sutra, which said that the Buddha could not be known by the 32 marks. In previous sutras, they talked about the qualities of the Buddha and the appearance of the Buddha. And then from there were Buddha statues representing that. But those are ideations of the Buddha, not what the Buddha would look like. It may be something that, let's say, Kuan Yin or the Buddha could appear in that way to you, but that's still a samsaric appearance. We would have no idea, what your original face is, or the face of the Buddha, outside of samsara. It requires us to have faith and to be able to transcend the idea of conceptual thinking and conceptualizing what we believe the Buddha to look like. Doesn't preclude you from burning incense to the Buddha, or to using the Buddha in terms of a devotional. There's nothing wrong with that. This was something that, to me, was a part of Buddhism. I had to kind of come to and understand and see that this is part of the practice. This is what we do. So I'm very, very devotional. So I'm not somebody that's kind of like a quasi proto New Agey Buddhist, that says, "Oh, don't pay attention to all of that stuff." I am devotional in terms of that, and there's a place and a purpose for all of that. No, the thing is that being devotional doesn't mean that I don't understand that those are just simply representations of the Buddha nature. And so it's proper for us to do that. It's proper for us in our practice to do that. But also it's proper for us to contemplate what mind is. And it's beyond any conceptualization that we can do. This is what we do day in, day out, when we're sitting on the cushion, when we're talking to people, when we're doing things. We practice in this way. It is not easy for us to set these things aside, but it is necessary, and it's why mind work is so important, because it gives you that extra boost in terms of the practice, and you follow the Buddhism study, and that's what's important. Again, I'm kind of running out of time again. Well, suffice it to say, I had many examples of definitions of Buddha nature, and with a lot of red lines and crossouts on it. And it's always talking about, for instance, our consciousness has very strong habits, and we're saying, whose consciousness? Our consciousness. Consciousness is just an illusion. And so when we see things, and we see not from the viewpoint of the sun shining and there's clouds and we're down here, and then the clouds go away and we go, oh, here's the sun here. Originally, the clouds and the sun, they're there. We don't know when the clouds form. We know how they form, but they also are encased in the sun. They're not outside the sun. And that's very important in terms of how we look at it. It is the difference between in the Platform Sutra of Shen Shu's way of polishing the mirror versus Huai looking at things and seeing them as they are clearly in this very moment and seeing that it is all mine and letting go of the idea, the notion of thoughts, even letting go of the notion of letting go of thoughts, which is very, very important, which is why he was talking about no thought, meaning that we are capable of producing thoughts that are constructive as long as we don't hold on to them. So it's not that you purge the mind from thinking. Then in this world, we cannot function outside the world, outside of samsara. Does the Buddha think? The Buddha's where? If it's aware, it doesn't need to think, I am thinking. It knows, but it knows not from the knowing of book learning, but just knows because everything is the body of the Buddha. This is the Buddha nature. When we begin to practice in this way, and you start reading the sutras, you'll see that what I'm saying is consistent with what's stated in the sutras. Okay, let me see if there was some other stuff I had here. In the short time I have. I never even got to luminous mind again. All right. One of the components of the true nature is referred to as luminous mind. This is Prabhaswara in Sanskrit. It's Guanming Xin in Chinese. Anybody? Did I get it close? Luminous mind. Yeah. Lucky pronunciation. Okay. So this luminous mind is very, very important. Now, this appeared in the Pali Canon way back when, and it's part of the Agutara Nikaya, and in this one, there is the idea of this luminosity of mind. The Theravadins didn't really use it that much, but they it was there, and there's all sorts of different descriptions of it, analogizing it to this brightly shining mind or luminosity, clear light. But again, these are constructs of what Buddha nature is. So when we use those kind of constructs, then we begin to start looking for the light to be shining on us or everything else, so that we can say, oh, look, I have a luminous mind. It'd probably be better if you had a suit made out of LED lights, to have something like that. And people go, oh, he must be enlightened. Look at him, he's shining. But it's not in this way. The luminosity is this wisdom that's no longer called wisdom, because there's nothing that we can say that isn't wisdom, because it's simply a returning to mind, an awakening, we could say, of some component of mind that was mired in the samsara. Once there is a realization, this body and this consciousness nevertheless remains in samsara, but there's a difference. There is mind as well. And one then begins to act according to mind, not to the self, and begins to use the consciousness as a tool to further its purpose. And its purpose at that point from the Heart Sutra is compassion. And the compassion is to awaken others. that are slumbering. The meat puppet or the red meatball cannot be awakened. If you come back in 100 years, you'll see it's a failed experiment. Where's Gilbert? Oh, he's up in smoke. You know, they burned his body many, many years ago. But that which was speaking at this very moment 100 years ago has never been born, never died. It's just mine. And there'll be some other meat puppet with his finger up going like this, you know, and so carrying this on. It is in this way that we see the world, and we see it clearly. There's this wisdom beyond wisdom. The wisdom beyond wisdom is just this all pervasive knowing of mind itself, that it knows that there's not even wisdom anymore because there's no ignorance, because there is no individual egos, personalities, lives, or being. All of those were illusions. So where is there ignorance there other than it was a dream? If you have a dream and you make a bunch of mistakes and you wake up, you realize that that was in the dream. It wasn't in your life. But here, even when you wake up from a dream, you're still in a dream. That's the difference. You have to see that you're still in a dream. And that's what's important. So there's this luminosity of the mind that we have to see. And that came from the very early part where they talked about this. And I talked about this last week a bit on the luminous mind and showing how it relates to the practice. If one is ignorant of the practice, then there's no development. But if one understands this, then there is development. Is there development? Yes, only in samsara though. But nevertheless, it sets the foundation for the practice. Again, no, my efforts to talk about Buddha nature are meager. I wish I had greater wisdom to be able to explain it to you better, or to at least try to light a brighter torch for you to follow. But I do my best. But I don't want you to get caught up in things and try to think that this is some kind of a state of mind. It is not a state of mind. It is mind. We are a state of mind. Our notion of a self is a state of mind. But mind is mind. And there isn't a one mind. When everything is fundamentally empty, meaning everything is mind, there's nothing to be separate from that or to be called even a one. As opposed to what? A zero? It incorporates zero as well. Okay, so that's it for tonight. I didn't get to the part that I think Michael was championing at the bit for me to do, but we'll leave that for when I come back to talk about Bhavanga consciousness and a little bit of the practice, the deeper practice and advancement of the practice. But we'll leave that for another time. So I'll open it up for questions. Renee.
Hi. Hi, Gilbert. Yeah, it's very nice for me to join this study group. I did learn a lot from you. And my question is, when we talking about see things as they are, from my point of view, it's like impossible to see things as they are. And because first, if some food, right? the taste of the food, it totally depends on the emotion of mine today or at this moment. Sometimes if I got sick, the food tastes different. So really cannot feel things as they are. The second, if we hear something, like people talking, right? If we just hear the part, we basically use what we hear to make a conclusion. It's definitely not to see things as they are, but in the fact that's what we as we receive the information. Or for the eye, if we are the short sighted and we don't have glass, we really cannot see things as they are. It's just from the body part. Also, our education, our cultural background, that will conclude the information we received. So I think it's really hard or impossible to see things as they are. Sorry if my question is clear.
Yeah, if we try to see things from the viewpoint of samsara and from the notion of an ego, um, we we will not be able to see things as they are. We can use a worldly wisdom. For instance, we know that if a pot is on the stove and there's a light underneath it, a flame, that we don't touch the pot because it's hot. That's worldly wisdom. So we can see things as they are within the phenomena, but we still don't understand the nature of things clearly. We have a limited amount of wisdom, but it's still not bad. It's better than nothing. But the mind itself sees things just as they're appearing. It knows there's a knowing there that is that transcends samsara, that understands, and it is something as we begin to put down the self, then mind then there's more access to mind, and in the mind there's a lot of information that comes in that isn't available to somebody that's holding on to the idea of an ego. And so when they do that, then there is more of an understanding of why things happen. It's like Master Sheng said that scientists can tell you, how you're born to your parents, but they can't tell you why. And it is that knowing that comes from mind, not from the experiences within samsara itself. That'll give you something to chew on.
Oh, thank you. So does it mean to see things as there is no our limitation? So we know that our anything we see is with a limit. It's not no limit. So we always have our limit. We see the limit. And also we still don't know, not truly experience the emptiness.
Yeah, you could say, like, let's say you were in a video game and you're driving a car. You could not drive the car outside the frame of the TV monitor. You could not drive it and all of a sudden come into the world, this world, from the TV. There's a limit there as to your understanding and the rules that belong to that particular video game of how fast you can go, where you can go. You can't drive in the sky. You only can drive on the road. And if you hit a car, then you get into an accident. All of these things are there, and you understand those limits, but you don't understand how the game even came about, or the purpose of the game, or whatever. Those are the things that only the person that made the program could do that. the Buddha understood that. There was no central person that made the program, but he presented us with the 12 nidanas of dependent origination to help us understand how things come about. When we begin to practice that, then we apply it to our everyday life, and we see everything is happening because of something else that was a cause from the past. As we begin to do that, we demystify the idea of this world, and we begin to see that it has a foothold in the past and a foothold in the future. But the beauty of it is that when the mind is using wisdom, it can direct what is happening to the future that's a more positive future than where it was headed towards before. And so there is that. And so we understand that. We understand also there's a limit. I cannot snap my fingers and take everybody to the Pure Land, but I can still speak, and little by little, if I generate more people that do the same thing, sooner or later, then it will make a substantial impact in this world. And so we see that, and we understand the limits of samsara, but we work within those limits to bring about positive changes. That's what's important. That's what life's about. It's not about you and collecting this and getting retirement and then quitting your job and then dying. It's about you figuring out something that you can create a positive change here. Okay. Your question's a very good question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Sam.
Hey, Gilbert. Thank you for this lecture today. And just really quick, going back to when you were talking about how in our practice, we don't look to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as like, we don't conceptualize them as being like a god or like a deva or things like this. And it reminded me of something Huang Po said, and I wanted to ask you about to kind of clarify or speak on, which is if the practitioner contemplates Bodhisattvas and Buddhas as pure, awakened, enlightened, and so on, and yet they contemplate sentient beings as defiled or deluded or shrouded in ignorance, that this duality, this separation, will generate delusion and will leave the practitioner lost, essentially, for many kalpas. I was just wondering if you could speak on that a bit.
Well, a while back, I injured my toe in at a retreat, and so my toenail isn't very pretty. It. I don't have to paint it because it's a nice purple color, and now it's almost the nails falling off. I look at that and say, okay, but still, it belongs to my body, so I have to take care of it. So no matter what, I have made sure it doesn't get infected, and I don't stub it or I don't do anything. Even though it's very far away from my brain, it's still part of my body. Likewise, all appearances appear in mind only. All appearances are created by mind. How could the Buddha separate themselves from these things and say that these imaginings are real imaginings, real dreams, versus just a component of mind itself? And so when mind sees things in that way, it sees them in a clear way, in a virtuous way, which doesn't discriminate one way or another, or pick this toe or another toe or whatever. It just sees things as they really are. And as a result of that, it is something that that as we begin to practice, we see there's nothing that's apart from mind. And as we begin to understand that, it helps us understand all of the happenings that happen in samsara and the reasons, and also, more importantly, what could be put there to be a positive outcome. And so this is how we see the world. We don't see that and pick and choose and say this is this way or whatever. I've often said that the Buddha's use of vexations of sentient beings to practice. And so that's very important. And you have to kind of contemplate that and see what that means. Okay. So work on that one.
Thank you, Gilbert. Thank you. Amitabha.
Sorry. I know you're under the weather. You feeling better?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gilbert. This is such a powerful talk. I just want to share a couple things that I've learned from not just this one, but like other ones that you're talking about absorption. And the more I listen to that, it becomes more clear what it is that that the self is completely absent, being absorbed. So that kind of gives me a clear path that what direction I should go. And also the what you just said about the toenail and my just recently, my poor health and the other lesson that I shared, that like the problem with falling asleep, not enough energy, and those so-called obstructions. I just realized that I could at any moment just observe that itself and see that it is what it is, and in that moment, and that's what it takes. And there's not really obstruction. There's nothing can stop me from doing that. Thank you so much.
This is a maturation of the practice. And again, I was talking about people that practice and pick it up very quickly, and when you practice sincerely, even though one could be considered a novice relative to the long time years of practice that some people have, you really can get there because of the sincerity and this idea where your turning phrase is this self-absorption, to be absorbed into mind. It is no longer words, but it is you contemplating that when you sit, and then as you're sitting to meditate, and allowing the self just simply to be absorbed into mind is something very, very powerful. And so it is how we practice. When I mention something and then you take it to the cushion or you take it to your life and you practice it, it pays off. It's not the book learning anymore. It is in that way, even if it's just a tiny, tiny little experience, it's still evident that there's something beyond the idea of this ego. And that drives a tremendous amount of wisdom. It generates wisdom that's very powerful, that can give you faith and direct you towards even greater realization. So it's good. I'm very happy of your sincerity in terms of the practice. Anybody else? Okay. We can go off right now. But don't hang up yet.
Gilbert, just a reminder for everybody who may be watching the recording that we are not going to meet. We are going to take the winter break, and we are going to meet. Is it January 8th after the New Year's as well?
Yes, I guess you could put that on YouTube too. Then
okay,
I was going to make that announcement afterwards, but that's fine.
Okay,
where you can take us off, and then